Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 217 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to see if there's any other uses for puffers before we chop them up and turn them into food. Enjoy. I quieted down the farting sounds a little bit, so it's a little easier to listen to now. They are still expanding. These two rows are pretty good, but the others are still working their way down. And now at this point, we have to kind of decide, what do we want to do with all of these puffers we're starting to build up? And it's kind of an interesting question, because we have the choice between puffing with one type or mixing them and combining them and puffing with two. You can see that when you use two of them, the chance that one of them will die is much less, that there's only a 3% chance that number 4 will die, where it's a 5% chance with this one. So your puffers will go farther. But there's another question is, can we even use all of these puffers? Because we're going to have a surplus of 1.76 of each puffer type. And it's kind of worth just going down here and seeing what kind of numbers this would be. So if we do input 1.76, you can see that we would need 700 of these. And yeah, we can put some speed modules in there, but we'd still need 391. And this is not a small part of our factory here, but you can see that it's basically about 350 right here. So if we wanted to use up all of just the gaseous puffers, we would basically need to double the size of this thing. And that's just too much, especially when you consider the numbers, that it would provide 7,745 acid gas per second. That would make even a train cry. So we're going to have to throw the idea that we can use all these puffers right out the window, because there's just no way. We don't have the need for it. To use all of these puffers as they're being grown, to put it lightly, the solution would be industrial in scope. Much more than this. This is not a mega base yet. I know it might feel like that to some extent, but it's not. To use all the puffers, we would probably need like this whole area right here. It would be kind of insane. So let's shift our process here away from potentially using all the puffers to using them for useful processes. And one thing I'd like to bring your attention to is the rancid waste puffing. Basically to get rid of sulfuric wastewater, where 20 artificial atmosphere goes in and 20 acid gas comes out, and then it converts the 100 wastewater to 100 hydrogen sulfide gas. And what would that do? Even on a small scale. And actually, we can figure this out, where out of the 6 setups that we have here, 3 of them are producing the sulfuric wastewater. And actually, to find the exact number, we can just go through here. So it's 750. So our entire factory's output would be 2250 of water per second. Let's just put that in, just as a curiosity here. We're still not using anywhere near the amount of puffers we have available. And yes, this setup would be large, even with speed modules. But it would give us acid gas and hydrogen sulfide gas. Now, we've already kind of learned, when you look at our breeding cycle here, where to create the necessary atmosphere, 175, it also creates the same amount of acid gas. So there's our 175 acid gas coming out of it. And we have determined that this setup produces an excess of sulfur, hydrogen fluoride, and carbon dioxide. And actually, the carbon dioxide is almost full. Probably should run in there and throw some more tanks down, just to keep this going. It's not very valuable resource, but whatever. So we've determined that this is a sulfur positive and a fluoride positive setup. and the ratio is basically 1-to-1. So 1 atmosphere goes in, 1 acid gas comes out, and this creates acid components for us. So when we're considering doing the rancid waste puffing, we already know that this is going to create a small amount of extra sulfur. But also, because it's converting the sulfuric wastewater, it's creating more hydrogen sulfide gas, which can also be converted. So let's check that conversion. We can leave the acid gas for now because that acid has to go back into the system. We'll get a little bit extra out of it, but let's just take that out of the equation for now. Let's just convert the hydrogen sulfide. So we have our hydrogen sulfide, you add oxygen, and we won't worry too much about the numbers, but then we get a sulfur output, 112. So what this system will do would take our wastewater that we're producing out of the 3 methods that create it and give us 112 sulfur. Well, let's compare that to the method we're doing now, which is with water treatment, where we have 2250 wastewater going in, and then it gives us 22.5 sulfur, and of course the purified water comes back out, but that's not too big a deal, and some mineralized water, but these are very low value resources. The main thing we're doing all this for is sulfur. So if you compare, for the same amount of wastewater, puffers will produce even more than 112 sulfur per second, where we only get 22.5 with our current method. So basically what this means is that if we decided to use this, it would be much more efficient for generating sulfur. And when we do tier 3 ore sorting, we're going to need to add acids to get to the next tier of ores. And then all those acids we're building up are just going to disappear. So this is a potentially useful thing to do. But do we need to do it now? Not really. As you see, we have our 50k of sulfur, which is what the system is set at. Some of these others are a little lower, but you know, fluorite is a little lower than 50, but it could be 50. And we'd be generating this, which we need to send this down there, which would also make it basically 50. And sodium nitrate's a little harder, but when we're trying to think of what in the world do we do with these puffers, well, one potential thing we can do is generate more sulfur for the wastewater that we do have. But we don't need to do it now. So we can create more atmosphere, but before I showed that basically at a 1-to-1 ratio of atmosphere you get acid components back. Well, what this does is it's 20 atmosphere and 100 acid gas gives us 100 atmosphere. So we're losing atmosphere components out of that. So this actually consumes some of those acid components, so it's less efficient. The reason why I'm kind of talking like in this way is because I don't want to have to go through 15 different methods of using Hellmod to find out which version is better, because it's so interconnected at this point. It's kind of hard to really do it in that way. Can you already see what it took just to build this breeding setup? And it's not even that complicated, really. So I don't want to go through that any more than we have to. But the idea for there is that it would be a much faster way of generating your atmosphere, where instead of having to go through this whole spiel where you process the acid gas, you process the sulfur, you inject it back into the atmosphere machines, and then it goes in here. That's a faster way, but even though this is quite a few atmosphere machines, it's not that many machines considering they fuel this entire setup. So doing puffing in that way seems a little unnecessary, but the option is there. As far as the other methods, doing it with nitric wastewater isn't the same level of efficiency as with sulfur, because instead of generating acid components, it's giving us ammonia gas, which is just hydrogen and nitrogen, and those are easy enough to create if you need to. So this doesn't have the same value as sulfur does. Doing it with fluoric wastewater absolutely does, for the same reason, where you get your hydrogen fluoride and then you can turn that into the acid components. So this is definitely an efficient way of generating fluoride as well. And then with corrosive or chloric wastewater, we would get hydrogen chloride gas, and like with nitric wastewater, this is kind of questionable in efficiency because hydrogen chloride, you just make that with hydrogen and chlorine, which is easy enough to create, compared to water treatment, which gives us the salt, which is more useful as a component. So this is also somewhat less useful, but really none of these do we actually need to do right now. Our factory does not need any of this stuff. We're keeping up just fine. Well, what about the single puffing? Well, if we did just gaseous puffers, we would get acid gas as a result, and that's basically generating acid from nothing because we're putting compressed air in, and then we're pretty much getting twice as much of it back out in acid gas, which is more fluoride, more sulfur. So that's a pretty efficient thing to do as well. Do we need to right now? No, but it's certainly good. And the main component is compressed air, which is super easy to create. I can't even really remember the last time we had a major recipe that involved compressed air that wasn't just splitting it into nitrogen and oxygen. So that's an interesting method there. Then with rancid puffing, we put ammonia in and get raw gas out. This is an exceptionally good thing to do, but we don't really need to do it right now. And another thing to consider is that any of these things that we do, because of the quantities of resources involved, like if we were using it to make sulfur, we couldn't possibly ship all this stuff across a factory. Like 2250 is a lot of water. Like if you noticed, one thing this factory doesn't have is giant series of pipes and belts. This is probably the most significant thing I've got going right here. And that's kind of just connecting the bottom half to the top half here. But there's not giant lines of pipes and belts and everything. And kind of the reason for that is I'm just leaning on logistics. So when I'm thinking about the efficiency of everything, I'm thinking about the logistics of it. So if we did this kind of puffing, we'd basically have to do it locally to where the water was being made, because we would have no hope of moving this amount of water around. So that's very important with puffers, is figuring out where is the puffing going to happen, because at the scale necessary for it to be useful for your factory, the numbers are going to be huge, and you do not want to have the logistic nightmare of moving. Even that much sulfur is kind of annoying. Like, you'd straight up need a train for that amount of sulfur, but even a train would be unhappy with this amount of water per second. So you have to be very careful with the things you want to try to do. So this would be an efficient use of gas, but logistically it's difficult, and also we just don't need it right now. We're doing just fine with our gas components, and we're probably getting fairly close to maxing out on rubber. Well, I guess not. It's only a quarter full, but still. That's more rubber than we really need right now, so we're fine there. But one thing that's interesting is that this needs ammonia gas. And where can we get ammonia gas from? From nitric wastewater. So although this is less efficient as far as using your nitric wastewater, it does make this setup much easier, where first you do this puffing, which has pretty small resources, and go straight into this machine, and then you don't have to worry about all that ammonia. So that's kind of something to consider on what you can do. And then blazing puffers can create urea for the fertilizer, but we don't really need that right now. I mean, we could use it. All these things we could use, but I guess my point is we're not short on anything. Like, the way I'm seeing this setup is that when we're short on something, then we go back to the puffers and say, what can they do to help us? But since we're not short on anything and the factory is actually doing great right now, I don't really see the need to buff up anything that we have. And this requires carbon monoxide, which we could use from the carbon dioxide extras that we have on hand. So that could make that a lot easier. This requires the sulfur dioxide gas, which is already floating around and it's being converted into sulfur. So that would be pretty easy to buff up there. We could use this gas, but we don't need it right now, so there's really no reason. And then with corrosive puffing, it requires the hydrogen chloride gas to make hydrazine, and we could use the chloric wastewater to make that more efficient and easier. So we have lots of options, but we don't need any of them. That's kind of what's funny. I was really expecting that we would kind of want to use all these puffers for things, but now after thinking about it, I don't think so. This is kind of something to keep in our back pocket for the future. Man, that's a lot of eggs. That sometime in the future, when we're short on any of those resources, we'll have to remember that we have a ton of puffers. And one thing I did here is I set this to try to hold on to 100 puffers of each type. And that is essentially what would stop this whole process from running. But we do need some kind of control on this. Right now it's just running unconstrained, with the exception of that. I kind of overrode the limitation on puffer eggshells right there, just because I'm trying to max out on all this stuff, and then once we are, we could probably go back to the eggshells. This is filling up quite rapidly, and we are building up a ton of extras, so we'll probably want to now think about how are we going to kind of smooth this setup out. And one thing we can do is chop up all those puffers. And it looks like the mushroom growing is improving in efficiency, and it's also making a lot of extra fruit. And one thing we can do with the fruit, actually, is turn it into nutrient pulp. And then that nutrient pulp can go back into feeding the puffers. So we can make that go away without actually having to ship it anywhere. So somewhere we're going to need to chop up these puffers. And let's just make a new line for it. Could probably actually just use this line just to get an idea of the numbers. Well, it doesn't like that. I kind of want to just see how fast we can chop them up. Looks like each puffer type generates the same amount of meat. So we can put in our number of 1.76. To find out what we would need. And as it turns out, quite a few of these. About 8 of them for each puffer type in order to keep this from getting overloaded. And can we use the meat for anything? Oh yeah, forgot about that process we can use. You can create polluted fish water by just throwing meat in. I think we're doing it the fish way because it's a lot more efficient than just chopping the fish up into meat. That is certainly a useful thing we can do, and that would just improve the efficiency of the fish water, and that means more crystals. So I kind of want to do that too then. Well, in that case, let's do a line. And it's 1.76 for all of them. But all in all, that would give us about 9 meat a second. And then we can take that meat, and using a very small number of machines here, basically one, we could jam it in the water. And it, doesn't really create that much water, honestly, compared to the amount we need. So this would generate 35 polluted fish water a second. And how much does this need? 750. So it's not that big of an improvement, but it is an improvement that we can do. And I guess one other thing we can calculate before we start building our items here is what we do with those fruits here. We'll have 3.38 fruits. So we'll come in here. We want to do nutrient pulp from the fruits. 3.38. And speed it up until we only need one machine. So if we only need one machine, we probably don't need to put it on the bus quite yet. But we do need some butcheries. So let's find a single. Put it in there. We need butchery. Then they get started. I don't know if we really need 200 of them. So let's just do 50. Let's see, we've got to have a few of these in here. Right? We have a nutrient extractor. But no butcheries, it seems. Not that it's a particularly difficult thing to build. I think we needed a liquefier for this. Yep, and then the rest of them are the butcheries. We'll just grab whatever they've got made so far. And then from an efficiency standpoint, it makes sense to pull out of this storehouse, but it's already getting pretty filled, and it looks like we're filling up on the blazing puffers now. So we got 3 of the 5 types, and I'm keeping them all running just because, although they mostly generate the main type, they also kind of contribute to the others just to make this fill up that much faster. But this warehouse is almost full here, so we're about to clog. Although it does add some time, it probably makes the most sense to stop the output of this when we have enough of any given type. Stop it down there. Ignore the farts. And we can come in there. That'll send the signal to everybody. Probably don't need to worry about this anymore. I'll just take him out for now. It'll probably just keep running, but whatever. And let's say we want to hold on to, how about like 1,000? So we go in here and say, if we have less than 1,000 puffers, you can turn on. Although I do kind of want to make this as symmetrical as possible. Since we are good on puffers there, it's not going to run. We need to do the same thing for the other types. Same thing here. We have to have less than 1,000 puffers for it to turn on. And some of the other more desirable types will get stuck in there, but what can you do? And those will run because we're not quite maxed out on those yet. Kind of want to let it run and see what it stops at. And we're also going to need to have some kind of bypass that in the event we're just throwing away puffers, we may still want to do so if it means making puffer eggs. So let's make this a little more complicated. So the red wire goes in for the inputs. And then we'll have the green wire actually control. We have 2 different conditions which we would want this to run. The first would be puffers are low. So if it's under 1,000, give us a green square. But the other condition is that the eggshells are low. And I'm not sure what kind of number we want to aim for here. How about let's do 5,000. So if the eggshells are below 5,000, you can also turn on and green square. And then the condition of this requires, looks like we're getting overloaded here, that we have at least 1 green square. So either condition is active and they turn on. Yeah, it looks like it's starting to fill up, but also almost all of these are running at full power, so it's interesting how it's not running full power here, though. I think there's a missing belt in there. It's kind of hard to see, but it's in there. And it's also the case over here as well. So it looks like just in the course of talking, these are almost all maxed out. Okay, we need to put a few of these down. Actually, let's set this to greater than 0. Why is this sending a go signal? It's less than 5,000, but it's more than 5,000. Oh, it's recipe puffers. Gotta watch out for that. There we go. Enabled condition greater than 0, good. I think all these are configured correctly, so that's our logic to control all of this. Any given line will run if we are short on one puffer type, and all of the lines will run if we're short on the eggshells. That seems pretty good to me. Of course, this warehouse is getting increasingly full. So now we need to figure out where we're going to chop all the meat up. could basically be anywhere, and it's going to be reasonably sized, so we probably want to do it like over here. These are all identical, but we'll just bring this out here where we need 8 of them. They'll just chop whatever they get their hands on. And actually we can do some combined inputs and outputs here. Looks like the numbers are kind of small, so we'll just pull from there. And then hopefully power poles will reach. Seems like it. Guess we put lights in last. So we would need 3 sets of these. I don't know if that's a good spot or not for them. It actually seems kind of decent, like it is. We don't need to jam this stuff in here super close. And the factory robots will come and help us. Then we need to get these inputs set up. The controlling element will be right here. And we'll just keep moving everything down here. Something like that. Then the last one's going to be a little tougher because of stuff in the way. Oh, and I guess we don't need 5 lines of these. We only needed 4, technically. This warehouse is getting very close to being full. Although, I kind of did this in a weird way. Because if we did it this way, we would chop up both types, even if we only wanted to chop one. So I think we would need to do something like this. With a space. And actually this last one could be controlled normally. So that signal will go down to each of those inputs. And what are we looking at for numbers? Looks like the blazing stopped at 1.1 when it was set for 1000, so that's pretty good. So how about we grind them if they're greater than, how about 2000? So we've got some of these on now. And I've got lots of puffer junk in my inventory. The best place to dump anything puffer is in here. And I don't think I need to worry about creating rules for all these things, because this really only applies while we're working on puffers here. So we put all the puffers in there and that should get cleaned up. Alright, so now we're getting filled on the yellow ones, so we're almost completely maxed out. And then hopefully this whole thing will stop. But for now, we can hook these up. And it's getting rid of extras. Then we need to turn this into the polluted fish water. So we've got to think of a way to do that. It's probably going to have to be sent all the way down here. So what kind of logic is set up? It looks like it's fairly complicated. Artificial fish water is maxing out, but polluted fish water is not, because they have top-up valves. So if we can inject it into this tank here, then the logic should still hold true. It does mean we're going to have a bit of a ways to go. Plus, we're going to want it to be nearby where the regular fish water is, because this recipe is regular goes in and polluted comes out. So actually we probably want to just send all the meat down here. And the meat numbers are reasonable. They're not great, but they're within the range of a drone. And otherwise we just have a huge belt, which would be annoying. And actually I want to unhook that because I kind of want to keep these fruits. So we do have half of a belt here. Of course, this is in the way, but it looks like it's going to be fine. So there's our meat. And we've got a bit of a pile up, but when it catches up, it should be okay. And hey, looks like we're just about backed up on all of them now. Okay, so the meat's going to come down here. Let's change this. Instead of fruits, it'll be meat. And the fruits themselves, oh, let's just pick them up and put them back in here because we can turn them into something else. Yeah, we don't have a radar right there. It's got to be one of the last places that doesn't have one. There we go. Okay, this is maxed out on acid gas. Is that just because of our various fluids which hasn't been sent anywhere yet? Oh yeah. We'll take care of this in a second. It looks like that maxed out because it was full. But, looks like we're below the limit now for everything except the original puffer, so that makes sense. Okay, supply depot is filling up. We would want it to be shipped down here, and anywhere over here is fine. Let's just put it right here because it's in line. There's the polluted fish water. We need 2 speeds and an efficiency. And we need to bypass our way in here. And what kind of inserters? A stack. We'll grab the meat. And let's put 5 of them in there. It'll take a moment for the fuel truck to get here. But I kind of want to create another depot because it seems like the kind of place that it would be out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, the meat got here. So we can test this. We pretty much just always want this to run. I think the reason that that gap was left in there was to allow the fish breeding tank to have space. But it also has its own tank, so there's quite a bit of buffer there. Does seem like it's going a little slow. There we go. Could also potentially turn the random fish we pick up into that polluted fish water as well, as opposed to turning it into fish food. But I don't know how often we really pick up fish, so it's probably not worth changing. Okay, we've used up all of that meat. Looks like this system is still running to max out the green puffers there. Seems like we're using all of our nuts. I want to make sure that it's making it all the way to the bottom. Yeah, it seems like it. Looks like this chest has gone through all of its supply of food, and the seeds are almost making their way down to the third machine here. Okay, the next thing we needed to do was convert this fruit into nutrient pulp. And it's a little tricky because the whole system is pressurized right now using this tank, but it doesn't have to be. Or at least the system could be pressurized, but the input pump can be set to let's say like half. I'm not sure exactly how much nutrient pulp this would be. Guess we can check. That we require 175 nutrient pulp a second, and this will create 40, so not nothing. But this pressurization pump should help the fact that this tank goes to 50% not cause any sort of issues. Okay, let's get rid of the fruit byproduct then. We need a nutrient extractor, and it can go like right here. There needs to be the condition on there, more than 1,000, which it is. And I think we can just move this down without any kind of pumps or anything, since it's fairly low flow. There we go. Speed and efficiency. That will slowly get rid of all of that extra there. So we've taken care of the extra puffers as a byproduct and the extra food as a byproduct. Oh, looks like this is completely maxed out, but it will make more space as it consumes puffer. But if it jams, that's fine. It's only these two on the end that are running anyway to build up a buffer. Although, that said, we might not want to keep this open because it's going to hold a lot of stuff. So for now, I think I'm going to unhook these. Because we think we mainly just have, yeah, a bunch of the regular puffers to grind through before this system will be balanced. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we're going to use signal transmission and see if we can get rid of the rest of the byproducts. See you later.